All right. And we're live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second live video in our series. Hope everyone's doing good. If you get a chance, I would love to know where you are popping in from. I know last week we had a few people from different places, so I'm interested to hear where you're watching from. And I have to put my glasses on. We had this conversation last week. I'm getting older. It's not getting easier. So tell me where you're from. Tell me who you are and if you're on. And I hope you are joining us because this is a new series we're starting on our YouTube channel. And really, it's the unfiltered version of Myrtle Beach. So we can answer questions. This week, I thought it would be fun to talk about the weather in Myrtle Beach. I've spent a good amount of time all around the United States. And so what you think the weather is like in Myrtle Beach many times is different than what it actually is. And so I think it's interesting to answer questions about the weather. We can talk about it. We'll talk a little bit about the seasons tonight. We'll talk a little bit about, hurricanes coming here from another area. It's totally foreign concept to a lot of people. That'd be like me moving to the middle of the country where there's a lot of tornadoes, and we don't get a lot of those here. So it's a little bit of a foreign concept, but at the end of the day, want to talk about both. And so tell me where you're watching from. If you're on, tell me, what questions you have about the weather, if you have questions, and we'll kind of go from there. I'm excited tonight, though, to talk about the weather and what goes on here in Myrtle Beach. And we're going to talk about it a little bit from a buying and selling standpoint, maybe a building standpoint. So we're going to talk about both. And no need to wait too long. I'm going to give everybody another minute. And but if you just joined, we're breaking down the seasons tonight. Storms, a little bit of storms, flood zones. And, if you're planning on moving to Myrtle Beach, we'll talk about different times of the year and what's good and what's bad about the weather and in reference to weather. So I have contact information up. So if you have any questions, but in the chat, you can just ask your questions and I'll be glad to answer them too. And if I don't get to them, what I will do is each week, what I'm going to do is I'll take those questions. And if there's enough about a certain subject, then we'll make that another topic for live videos. And if you have topics for the future, I actually have next week's topic up. We will probably skip the next week, but keep an eye out for what we do the week after. It'll be on our YouTube channel. And we'll go. Ed, there he is. I was waiting. You're here. That's what I'm talking about. Ed, one of our favorite customers. He's here. I appreciate you, man. Hope you're doing good. And if anybody has any questions, just let us know. All right. So let's get started. I have a lot of things I'd like to talk about when it comes to the weather. So let's talk about, in general, Myrtle Beach and the season. So we here are a humid subtropical region or area of the country. So what does that mean in human terms? And what that means is, by the way, I've got my notes here. I always have my paper notes. I don't know if any of you out there, I'm big on technology, but I've always got paper too. It's just how I roll. So we have a hot and humid summer. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And our fall is my favorite time of year. But what's funny is you have a joke around here. Everybody talks about how we just go from summer to winter because fall we almost skip it, right? It's a shorter time of year, but the weather is gorgeous. We do have all the seasons here. I find that is one topic where everyone is a little confused. In the Carolinas, we do have all 4 seasons here in Myrtle Beach. Now, they may be shorter than the normal season, and we may get different weather in that season than other areas of the country, but we do have all 4 seasons. And that is one of the big benefits about being here in the Carolinas. Before we lived here in Myrtle Beach, we lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is about 3.5 hours from Myrtle Beach. And the weather in Charlotte, you would get snow there. It was still not all the time, but you would get snow. And Myrtle Beach, we don't get snow. And we're going to talk about that as well. So anyway, we are very humid. You know, we have hot, humid summers, mild, short winters. And, you know, we have microclimates. You know, we have beach versus inland. I was taking some notes, making sure I didn't want to miss anything. And I have some stories I'd like to share if we have time today. But we have different microclimates, you know, as far as if you're inland versus if you're on the ocean. And what we find, which is really interesting, a lot of times I grew up just outside Chicago in Indiana. And what I think is really interesting, I would put the wind on the boulevard up against the wind in Chicago on the Magnificent Mile. That is how breezy it can get coming off of that ocean. That ocean breeze it's killer when you're walking down there, especially in winter. So you really got to be careful, but it can get brutal during the winter. So I also want to say about tonight, as we get into this is always a guide, right? So we're just having a conversation. You will always have to verify anything that we talk about. So we might talk about hurricanes. We might talk about flood zones. We might talk about flooding. We'll talk about the seasons, but you always have to have a great team around you. And I talked a little bit about that last week. And when I say team, I'm a big advocate for using a real estate agent, a good real estate agent. I'm also an advocate for having a good lender, a good attorney, and you need, you know, good subcontractors, good builders. You need a good team in your corner. So make sure that anything you do, you always verify it with a professional. And I just like to make sure that everybody knows that. And if you need any of these professionals, reach out to us, especially if it's here in Myrtle Beach. We can probably help you no matter where you're at. But here in Myrtle Beach, if you need any of those, we're here to help. And that's what mainly our channel is about, is making sure that you can get real answers, the answers that you need so that we can help you. All right. So let's continue on. So we're talking about the seasons. Spring. Let's start with spring. March through May is typically spring. And let's talk about temperatures because that'll give you a good idea. So March through May. March, you're anywhere from 45 to 68 degrees. April, 52 to 75 degrees. And May, 60 to 82. As you get into May, we're basically almost into summer weather. So, you know, in the beginning of the year, as we get off of winter, you know, sometimes we'll get some rain at that time of year. You know, but basically we have spring demand here in this market, right? A lot of people are looking to purchase homes, you know, building is getting into full swing. It's stable weather. So that's good. And there is one topic that kind of took me off guard when we moved here. So even when we lived in Charlotte, it didn't seem this bad, but living here in Myrtle Beach, I mean, it was the first time I had ever seen this. I could not believe the amount of pollen that we have. We have a lot of pollen in the spring, and I swear it feels like it goes on for 8 weeks because you get out of winter and you can't wait to go spend some time outside. For us, it's our back screen porch, right? So the pollen though, it sits and sits and sits. And then you have a big thick coating of yellow on everything. I mean, it just gets on everything. And it's so bad and so thick that you will drive through a parking lot in the spring and you can see your tire tracks. It looks like a light dusting of snow and you can see your tire tracks in the pavement. You can see your tire tracks everywhere you go. So then you'll power wash. And honestly, in a couple weeks, the pollen's back. So the trick is you have to be prepared for the pollen. If you have allergies, it can be a killer. Fortunately, I don't suffer from allergies when it comes to spring and pollen. But a lot of people do. And so that is something to understand and keep in mind when you're coming to Myrtle Beach or really down south, right? And it comes from the trees, the pine trees, the oak trees. They produce a lot of pollen. And so I just like to make sure that you're aware of that because that is something that no one ever told us. And it's something that you should be aware of. But after it's over, it's fine, but it does take forever. And I usually have to power wash our back porch twice, even if I wait for all of it to come down because it just sits. And so that is something that most people don't really talk about. But, you know, power washing, my goodness, every year you have to deal with it and you take the cushions off the the lounge chairs and the cushions off the couch. And it just is what it is. So I hate to be a complainer, but yeah, it gets thick, man. I'm telling you. So if you're someone who suffers from allergies, be prepared. Okay. So that's spring. Summer. So summer, we're talking June through August, right? It's hot and humid. We have afternoon storms, not a lot, but we get them. The heat index versus the dew point. So, heat index is basically what it feels like on your body. And it can feel like it's really hot in the summer, the humidity. For building, the heat and the humidity, it slows some exterior work up, but usually it doesn't really do much. I mean, the summer is a good time for us to work here outdoors. The one thing that I made a note of that I think is important for everybody to understand here in Myrtle Beach, and it's this way any place you go to, resorts or they have oceanfront properties and rental properties. Here in Myrtle Beach, if you're buying a oceanfront property or a condo and you want to get into properties, it is extremely difficult to get people into properties. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and your agent should try to help you get into those properties. We do for our clients. It's just very unlikely, usually because everybody here, they're enjoying their summer, right? So, but they come down and they're enjoying their time. And so you just have to be prepared that if you're looking to buy a property, I think a lot of people, what they do is they come here, they're having a blast. They love the beach and they're like, hey, you know what? We should look at condos while we're here. And they don't really plan to do that. They're just here on vacation. And then they're disappointed when we can't get them into anything because everybody's in a unit and they're being rented out. So it's just very difficult to get people into condo units. So if you're looking to purchase a condo and you do want to be able to get into all the units, other times a year would be better when it's not the high season. So June, let's talk temperatures. So June, the temperatures, you're talking 68 to 86. July, which is probably our hottest month, you're talking 73 to 88. And August, anywhere from 72 to 87. So I'm giving you a range of like usually the lows that it could be or the highs. It's usually in the middle or high. But that's a good range. It's a beautiful time of year. It is warm. It is beautiful. The water here, the temperature of the water can get to 80 and even above in the ocean, which is nuts because I grew up with my family always going to Ocean City, Maryland. So if any of you are familiar with up in the Northeast and the Atlantic up there, it's always cold. I mean, we could go in June and it was 60. So, June and even, maybe you get, by the time the water does start to even warm up, it gets cooler again because of the fall. So here was a big shock to me that one, the water in the ocean is very shallow compared to up north and the East Coast for the Atlantic Ocean. It also looks like the Caribbean many days, which I love about here in Myrtle Beach. The water is gorgeous because it's shallow. It reflects off the bottom. You have this really cool Caribbean look in the water. It's really neat. And there's a lot of sandbars as well. So the water is warm and it's beautiful. So something to keep in mind. And, here in Myrtle Beach, I find that you can find a bit of shells. So if you love shells and you love shark's teeth, that was something that we also were unaware of when we came to Myrtle Beach. I had never looked for shark's teeth as I was growing up and we were vacationing on the East Coast up north. Maybe there's some of you have looked for shark's teeth up north, but that was never a thing. When we moved down here, it was, and we've enjoyed that. And then also being able to actually find whole shells, not shells that are broken up and beat up from the coast up north. I always found that it was tough to find whole shells and enjoy that when we were up north. So just a couple of tips. Okay, so let's talk fall. And, obviously in July, we have the 4th of July. It's a great time to be here in Myrtle Beach. I wanted to mention that as well. The 4th of July here is great. We find it actually really fun to go and sit on the beach as a family and watch the fireworks because it's really not hard to go where the fireworks are and be able to just sit and relax on the beach at night and watch the fireworks. So if you've never done that, this would be something you would want to do here. So the fall, we're looking September through November. Okay. Let's talk temperatures. So 67 to 84 in September. October, you're somewhere between 56 and 76. It's usually not that cold in October, but it can get there quicker. And then November is where we start to dip, 46 to 68. Now, I'm a fall person. Fall's my favorite time of year. Fall is too fast, in my opinion here. It's usually hot straight through fall. That is the one downside here in Myrtle Beach, in my opinion. I'm not saying that's every year, but most years that we've been here, it's so hot. And so, if you like to go out hiking or camping in the fall weather, it's cool and breezy and it's not quite winter, but you have that cool weather. It's mostly hot here. And then, we've had many years where December, you're out there in t-shirt and shorts, which is what people love here, right? We're the golf capital of the country. So, that's one of the best things about it. But also if you love fall and you love that cool, crisp weather, you don't get as much of it. So that is one thing I miss from growing up in the Midwest in Indiana and Ohio. You miss that fall weather. That's my favorite time of year. And if you're not a fall person, then it isn't that big of a deal, but it is beautiful here during that time of year. And there's a lot of places you can go. Myrtle Beach is I shouldn't say centrally located. It's located in such a way that you can get to many places up and down the coast and inland towards the mountains very easily. And you just spend maybe a few hours on the road. And that's what's great about Myrtle Beach. If you want more of that fall weather, it's just a quick drive to the mountains, and that's the solution for us. And we'll talk about that as well when we get into the snow conversation. Okay, so let's see. So winter, let's talk winter. So in the winter, we have mild winters, coastal winters, but we still have winter. And it's rare that you see snow. Now, I say this when we just got snow in the last year. I think it was this year in January. Correct me if I'm wrong. Somebody can. I was meant to look that up and didn't, but we just had snow. We were actually on vacation. And so my son was really upset about it. He loves the snow. And so the one time it actually snowed in Myrtle Beach in the last 15 years, I can remember when we first came here, it might've been 2013 or 14. There was a light dusting of snow. That was the last time I saw snow here. So if you don't want snow, this is your place. The nice thing about the winter also is it's short. It isn't long. So you're talking maybe some of December. Like right now, it's been pretty cold. It gets to the 30s at night, and then it's always usually in the 50s during the day. So compared to up north, that's nothing. But January, February are the real winter months here. And we don't really get snow. The wind, February is probably, I think, the roughest month, where it's just like windy and cold, and it can be brutal, but not brutal like up north, but brutal for us. So those are the months that are probably the months that you wouldn't want to be here. But believe it or not, what I have seen take place in the last 15 years or so, 11 years, 12 years, is when we first started coming here and we first moved here, there weren't that many people here during the winter. But what Myrtle Beach has done a good job of is the convention center has brought in a lot of people, even in the winter months. And a lot of people come here to celebrate holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and then you've got a lot of events going on with the convention center. So even in the winter, people are coming down here, and, we have rental properties that are booked pretty much through the winter, not solid, but pretty good. And there's a lot of people, even like this year, Christmas, our properties have people in them. They're going to be spending Christmas here, which is really cool. And I'm happy about that. I love when people want to spend holidays in our properties. So something to think about. A lot of people come here, whether it's an investment property you're looking for, this is a great place because of that. And it also is great to buy investment property here because of the fact that you have most of the year people are here. The season is longer. Like, for example, I was talking about Maryland, that's a 5-6 month amount of time that no one's really there. Here, we only have 2 months of winter and people are renting, even though January. Thank you, Ed. So Ed, I love it. He's my fact checker. January 22nd, we had 4 inches of snow. We were on vacation. So that's a huge deal for Myrtle Beach. I mean, that was the most snow I've ever seen. And before that, I think it was roughly 2013 or 14 where we had maybe a dusting of an inch or something. So it's very rare. We celebrate it when we do. Of course, as you can imagine, when I used to live in DC, people would mention snow or ice or whatever in the winter and everything would shut down. This is worse. So if there isn't snow coming and someone says the word snow, everything starts to shut down. So we're just not prepared for it. So, but it is fun when it happens. And I really was disappointed, we all were, that we weren't able to take advantage of that and be here. But Yeah, like I said, we go to the mountains when we want snow, and Sugar Mountain and Beach Mountain aren't too far from here. So you can go to Asheville, you can go to Blowing Rock. There's a lot of great mountain towns that you can travel to. And there's quaint little towns and a lot of things to do: skiing, snowboarding, tubing. There's a lot of good options when it comes to the wintertime here. And one thing I should talk about quickly is, we were gonna do a video on just like what there is to do on Christmas, but since we're not doing that, I'll talk about it a little bit here. Brook Green Gardens. I did a video actually on social about Brook Green Gardens, 1,000 Lights, and it's so magical. So if you want to be here during Christmas, there are plenty of things to do. There's the North Myrtle Beach Light Show. There's Brook Green Gardens with a Night of 1,000 Candles. There's so many cool things to do. So look those up. There is a plenty to do here when it comes to Christmas time. Okay, so let's just wrap up. Seasons: short winter, humid, busy summer. Fall and winter are best to shop inventory. Summer is hardest for oceanfront access when you're talking property. But overall, great seasons. It's a beautiful place. And so I think I hit all my stories too, which is really impressive. Okay, great. We're on track. So what worries you most about moving to the coast? I was thinking about this earlier and I'm like, what do people really actually worry about? So if you're watching this video later and you're not live, and if you are live, what are the things that you thought you were like, hey, how bad are hurricanes? Because I have friends that call me from California and they say, oh my gosh, you have a hurricane coming. And there's really nuances to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So hurricanes and flooding, and we're going to get into that a little bit here. So let's see. I think I covered everything there. Let's see. Yeah, I did. Okay. So let's get out of here and let's go over to, let's talk a little bit about hurricanes. So I think there's some things that are important for us to be on the same page about when we talk hurricanes. I had no idea about hurricanes before I moved here. When we did, I thought it was really interesting. My wife, who is from Raleigh, and then she went to school in UNCW, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, which is about an hour and a half from here. They think hurricanes they're not a big deal. Obviously, they were also in college, so they were like, whatever. But people on the coast are used to it, right? It's just like if you lived anywhere else, you just prepare and you stay calm. And so, I was more worried when I first came, and we can talk a little bit about that, but there's two things to think about. There's direct hits, which is when the eye of the storm comes over your area, right? So if you get a direct hit from a category 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is the categories, you have category 5 as well, categories of hurricane. When you get a direct hit, that's when the eye crosses over, right? And then as it shifts a little bit left or right, then it's just more of a major impact, which will affect you. So since I did a little bit of research and I went back because I wanted to know myself, I've done it before, but it's been a while. We had, it looks like 6 different hurricanes since 1989. So I didn't go back further than 1989, but we had Hugo in 89, okay, which was a benchmark storm statewide. Bertha in 96, and that was the closest modern landfall for us. Fran in 96, and we had strong SC impacts to South Carolina. Floyd in 99, which was a near miss. We had major flooding effects from that storm, though. Matthew in 16, we had a lot of flooding and wind. Florence in 18, and that was historic rainfall and freshwater flooding. And we've had some storms that have come by in the last couple years, but nothing direct. So, when we first moved here, my concern was power and generators. And I it's funny. I always tell this story. My wife and I were building a home, and I wanted a generator on our home. And she was like, we don't need a generator. That's not necessary. We never get hurricanes. And this was this 2014, 15. And that must've been right before Matthew, or I think it was right before Matthew. And of course, right after that, we had Matthew come. I can't remember what category it was. I want to say 2 or 3, but we were in a dilemma because now we didn't have a generator. And I looked at my wife and I was like, see, we could have had a generator, but we weren't sure how bad it was going to be. Sometimes your power goes out. Sometimes it doesn't. It depends on where you get hit. And fortunately, our power went out, but it was quick. But the one thing that is kind of also a funny part of our story was my wife, we had just had a baby and she was breastfeeding. And so we had all this milk in our freezer and we were like, what are we going to do? I had a Yeti cooler and I had to put everything in a Yeti cooler, and we had everything in the freezer that we chose to put the milk instead of wasting all of our meat. And so it was a really tough situation. But when you go through things like that, you understand, here in the Carolinas, it's really funny because most of the time we leave. My rule is if it's a 2 or more, which some people might not agree, I have a family. I don't want to stress about it. But what you run into is the further inland you go, you have to find a place. Well, everybody else is doing the same thing. So you have to go pretty far in. And what's really interesting that you don't think about, Raleigh, which is 3 hours from here, sometimes gets hit worse than we do when the hurricane hits us right in the face. So they sometimes, if it's a slow moving storm and it goes inland and it just sits and it just dumps water. And so you have to really think about a plan. And that's what we focus on here on the coast, to be honest. It's stay calm, have a plan, and that's what you have to do. What I did notice in this last season here, in this last year, we didn't have much notice for some of these hurricanes, and they weren't able to tell us where specifically it was going to hit. That's another concern that you have here. So most of the time, we know when the hurricane's going to hit, where it's going to hit, but they have this. One of my jokes is the cone of uncertainty. So any of you who have ever watched the Weather Channel, they talk about the cone of uncertainty. And so they'll show this hurricane and it's like this. And then the cone of uncertainty, it goes like this and it covers this huge, large area. And that doesn't really help anybody. But, that's what you have to contend with living here on the Southeast or in the Southeast. Now, one of the interesting facts about Myrtle Beach is under where we are, we're right under this cove under North Carolina, because we're right on the border, North Carolina, South Carolina. And there's this little cove where North Carolina hangs over us. And so I think a lot of times, there's no science to back this up. This is just my opinion. We just never get, thank goodness, knock on wood, we just usually don't get direct hits, and it usually goes up, over, or below us, and Charleston will get it or somewhere else. And that little cove, I think in some way helps us. But we're on that right on the cusp of the border there, right under that little cove, right below North Carolina. And so direct hits haven't been too much of a concern, thank goodness. Now, there are a lot of hits that we've had where a lot of people have had damage, and that's unfortunate. But insurance is a big factor down here, right? And that's something we'll talk about on a future episode, flood zones. And we'll talk a little bit about, flooding and what you have to be worried about in that regard. But when it comes to hurricanes, understanding the language a little bit and just having a plan. If you do, having batteries, having flashlights, having things in case the power goes out, the heat goes out, generators, we still don't have one. We should, but having a backup generator, there's a lot of cool products out there nowadays that make it easy where you have a Generac and that can take care of your whole home in case you lose power. So something to think about here in the Carolinas. So, okay. So one of the points I wanted to mention was freshwater flooding. And so you have slow storms that are often the main hazard there. So a lot of hurricanes, you imagine them, bam, they hit you and then that tears everything up, which happens. But a lot of times what I have found since we've lived here that has been a problem is when it's a slow moving storm and it just sits and sits and sits, and then you have all this flooding. And we're going to talk in a little bit about storm surge and what really takes place when that occurs. That sometimes can be the most damaging, is the flooding and the water. So, but you have to respect the storm, and we prep early and we stay calm and we help each other out. I think that's one of the most important pieces about Myrtle Beach. When we first moved to Myrtle Beach, our plan was not to move to Myrtle Beach. Our plan was to move to either Charleston or Wilmington because Tiffany was so familiar and we love Charleston. When we moved to Myrtle Beach, we came here and we decided to stay in one of our places and decide. And what was so cool about that was the community. The community, we met so many great people through our church, through, just friends, and we liked it so much, and everybody was so welcoming that we were like, you know what? I think we should just stay here. And we just felt drawn to Myrtle Beach. And we've been here ever since, and we really like it. And so that's one of the best things about Myrtle Beach is the community. What you see on the boulevard is totally different. And this goes the same for most coastal areas, I got to believe. But it's different on the boulevard than it is inland, or just the community that's here all year round. And so Myrtle Beach has always been a welcoming place, a warm place, and we've always felt very comfortable here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about flood zones. We don't have to go too deep, but here in Myrtle Beach, obviously, insurance has been an issue, southeast region of the United States, for a while now. Florida is where it started. They've got major problems. Insurance is expensive, as everybody who watches this will know. But one of the things you have to be aware of is flooding. And so we have different flood zones here. And we always recommend people go to the FEMA website, and as someone's agent will tell them, okay, here's where you're at. So, you're in flood zone, whatever. We have different flood zones. But there's a couple things to keep in mind. Whether you're in, I think it's A and AE and V, and we have different flood zones that are more serious with water coming in. Basically, obviously, as you're closer to the coast, maybe, or near a body of water or a lake or a river or whatever. We live on water. And so even if you don't, though, we always recommend people get it, because you just don't know. And I say everybody's in a flood zone here. And so the question is, what's the likelihood of it happening and how bad? And so you have to be prepared. I could tell you stories for days about people that we know that didn't have flood insurance because they thought they didn't need it, or they wanted to just chance it because they weren't in a zone that was heavily flooded or low, opportunity to flood. And then it floods and now you lose everything. And so you have to be really careful, and it's a serious thing. So flood zones are important, but you can always use the FEMA maps to address it, and you can find those online. But from 2 streets away, one home can be totally different than the other. And so you really have to pay attention to that. And that is why using a professional, whether it's the lender and the agent and the attorney, it doesn't matter, but having professionals on your side really matter, because you want to make the right decision. It's one of your largest investments in your life. So usually, though, flood insurance isn't included in homeowners insurance. There's the National Flood Insurance Program, which is through in conjunction with FEMA. They have this thing called Risk Rating 2.0. And, flooding is changing, and the zones change, right? That can change. So you always have to stay up to date. It doesn't stay the same. It can change. So, but the 2.0, that's essentially where FEMA just went from flood zones to a more personalized approach, and considering other factors when it comes to, instead of just saying like, hey, this is the flood zone, they consider some other things. So it gets more nuanced than that. That's like, we're talking generalities, but you have to be aware, and you have to understand that flood zones are a thing. So you want to make sure that some of this you can also do research on ahead of time. We tell people, know ahead of time. You want to know the costs, right? And you have to be aware. We have seen situations where so many times where places that we didn't think would flood, and it's just not worth the risk. So, all right. So I have, other than flood zones, I wanted to go over some terms, some common, not vocabulary, but definitions, if you will, of maybe some things that you would want to know about, and when it comes to, living here in Myrtle Beach. And so I wrote a couple of them down, and we're going to go through them real quick just to make sure that you're aware of what they are. So let's see. All right. So storm surge. Storm surge, when I came here, wasn't really, if you're not in the area, you don't know. You're not going to, so it's basically water pushed, it's storm pushed ocean water. So as storms come, it drags ocean water with it. And that storm surge is most of the time here what's most dangerous. And obviously we're at sea level. So in some places are really low. And that is what causes a lot of flooding into the streets, which does happen, not all the time, but it does. Some places get it consistently, not a lot of places, but it does happen. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to be aware of where those areas are. So you have storm tide, right? And that's surge plus regular tides. And then you also have king tides, which are extra high natural tides based on the position of the moon. And so we have a property where water came in from the ocean because it was a king tide as well as a storm. and then the water came into the road, and then our parking garage has the elevator that goes all the way down to it. Water went in the elevator, shut the elevator down, and it caused a fire. So it's just a random turn of events, but you'd be surprised where king tides, different things to think about when you're purchasing property. And so you have to understand what goes on here. So if you're not just buying your primary residence, if you're buying an investment property, you want to make sure you understand exactly what you're getting into and you understand all the details. So you want to make sure that you ask us if you have questions. Our contact information is here on the screen. But whoever you're working with, if it's not us, make sure that you ask questions. We also have videos on our channel about flood zones and flooding. We have it about hurricanes. So we put that content out for you to benefit. We know this info, but we want you to know and make a good informed decision before you come here, before you purchase. And so that's why we create this content. We just want you to have the information to make a good informed decision. So let's see what else. So some people come here and they talk about undertow, and usually what they mean is rip current. So here in Myrtle Beach, it's kind of shocking. When I used to go up to on the East Coast up further, they have rip currents. It didn't seem as bad. It may be, but here the water is so shallow, I think it's deceiving. And people think, oh, it's no big deal. It's only knee high or waist high. It's actually kind of shocking how often people drown due to rip currents. It happens all the time. So please be aware of how rip currents work and what would happen if you were caught up in a rip current. And I always tell people to educate their kids so that they don't, it's easy to say when you're not in the situation, but to try to not panic and what to do if they were in a rip current. So something to think about, but we do have them here and they're common. So you have to understand the lifeguards are very good about putting up flags on the beach, which is something you should know about and something we did a video on. But there are flags on the beach which will let you know, is this a day I want to mess around with the ocean or no? And you have to always be cautious and always understand what you're getting into when you get in the water. Okay. So we talked about rip currents, nor'easters. Those are winter coastal storms where we have erosion and flooding. And I talked earlier about pollen, which is definitely something that affects us here. So, okay. I covered most of what I wanted to talk about today. My main concern was that you have a brief knowledge of what the weather is like here, what goes on here, and what we do during each season. What I want to make sure is that not only do you understand the weather from where you're coming, because what I had in my mind was totally different about certain things that take place here in Myrtle Beach. And I know that's the case because a lot of our customers ask us these questions. If you have questions or you're not sure, reach out to us. We're here to be a resource for you, and we love answering these questions. So let's recap quickly. So we have real seasons. We have mild, short winters. We have a humid, busy summer. Storm impacts regular, direct hits are rare, right? Flood risk, address specific. You have to know your zone and you have to get quotes early. That's what we would recommend. And buying access, the easiest is fall and winter. Hardest is the summer for oceanfront. So I think that if you know those statistics, those are the biggies. I'm sure there's some things that I forgot. And if you're watching this video later, please feel free to let me know. We always like to do videos, but if you have questions that I didn't cover, because I tried to think of everything, but there's probably a bunch that I didn't think of, then we want to make sure that we give it to you. Okay. So for those of you that did join the live stream, I appreciate it. I'm very excited to be doing these on our channel. If you need anything, let us know. In the meantime, if you want help figuring out where you fit best around the Grand Strand, our info is below, and we will see you on the next live video. Take care, everybody, and we will see you on the next one. Check the channel for the next date. It's under the live section, and we already have the thumbnail up and all the details. All right, everybody. Talk to you later.